LoG, and welcome to another edition of LoG Power-Ups. Today's power-up, we will talk about chords, in particular chord inversions, which is a really great way to add some extra color to your sound without changing the chord that you're actually playing. This power-up will be split into parts 1, 2, 3, and then the final part, with each video ending with a backing track that gradually increases tempo for you to play over. If you enjoy this type of instructional material, feel free to check out my Patreon at the link below. And now let's get on to part 1. All right, so if you already know what inversions are, you understand how they're used, how to play them, all that stuff, feel free to skip ahead to the minute marking on the bottom of the screen to jump ahead to the first chord that we'll talk about today for this power-up. But if you don't know what inversions are, let's talk about what they are, why they're used, why they are important. So let's get started with a normal C chord, just plain C chord like this. This is what is called a triad because it is a 3-note chord. A C chord, plain major like this, will have 3 notes in it, C, E, and G, or 1, 3, and 5 of the corresponding scale. So if you think about your C major scale, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, it's just the first note of that sequence, the third note of that sequence, and the 5th note of that sequence played at the same time. So C, D, E, F, G. That's how all your standard chords are built just by doing that process. So if I play a normal C chord, just those 3 notes sounds like this. That's just 1, 3, 5 of C being played in that order. Then if I fill it out with the normal C chord that most people know, it would be that. That's 1, 3, 5, and then another 1 and 3. So even though the chord has more strings in it or more notes, it's still just the same 3 letters, just repeats of them in different areas. Or if I play a totally different C chord like this is C, G, and E, or 1, 5, and 3. Slightly different order. Instead of going 1, 3, 5, we're taking the 3, putting it up an octave up here so it kind of stands out. Maybe we can use it as a melody or something. But still the same chord. It's still the same 3 notes, just in a different order. If I play the standard bar chord right here that most people know, again, still the same thing. 1, 5, 1, 3, or C, G, C, E. Or even if I play this one up top, again, one of the more common ones that most people know, still the same thing. C, G, C, E, G, C, or 1, 5, 1, 3, 5, 1. Still the same 3 letters over and over again. No matter how I play it, it's always going to be those 3 letters. If I didn't play those 3 letters and put in maybe another one, that is now not a C chord. It is something slightly different if we want to be 100% correct about it. Now, you might be thinking, okay, all of those chords, even though they feel very different to play, they all sound pretty much the same, which, of course, they do. It's all the same 3 notes. But there's one factor that plays into that samey sort of sound more than anything else, and that is the fact that the bass note of all of those chords that I just played was always C, or the root of the chord. So here's the C chord right here. That low note is C. Here's the fuller version. Low note, still C, still the 1. Here's that next chord, that bar chord that most people play right here. Again, different chords, slightly different color. We got an extra bright note on top, but still, what's the bass note? Still C, still the 1. Same thing right here. Extra bright note on top, a little bit different, sort of different shape. Again, what's the bass note? C. Because the root note is always the same thing, and because our ears hear that root note as like the foundation of everything else that's going on, no matter how I play any of those C chords, even though they all feel very different and some of them are in very different positions, they all generally sound the same because the bass note is the same. Okay, well, what happens if we took that same chord, but instead of playing C in the bass, we just put one of the other notes in the bass, right? We've got 3 notes in this chord. Nothing is telling us that we always have to play C, the root of the chord, in the bass. Nothing says we have to do that. So what happens if we experiment by putting some of the other notes in the bass? So what about E, the 3rd of the chord? Why don't we put that one in the bass? What would that sound like? Here's C, D, E. That's the 3rd of the chord. I'm just walking through my scale until I find it. Now, all I need to do from here is add in the other notes of the chord that I'm not playing. So G, the 5, and C, the 1, which I can do right here. Here's G, here's C. So if I play these 3 notes at the same time, that is a C chord, but notice the note that is in the bass, not C, it is E. C is 3. So if I play those 2 chords back to back, here's the normal C, and then here's the C with E in the bass, right? Doesn't it feel like it's sort of shifting a little bit. It feels like I'm going higher up to like another chord, right? But it's not. It's still the same exact chord. It's still C, but it has a little bit more motion to it. It has a little bit like this moving quality to it. Why? Because the bass note is changing. And because our ears hear the bass note as such a strong foundation of the rest of the chord, it gives the illusion that we are changing chords. It gives the illusion that there's more going on than there is. This concept is called inversions or chord inversions. It's when you take the notes of the chord, flip around the order a little bit until a different note is in the bass. Now, the interesting thing is the notes that are above the bass note, like the other notes, don't really matter that much in regards to the order. It's kind of up to you to place them in whatever order you want, but the bass note really does change how that chord feels depending on what it is. So if I play all three of them, right, we have a 3-note chord, which means we have 3 ways to invert this chord. We have 3 different notes to put in the bass. Let's see what it all sounds like. I'm gonna do all of this on the A string to keep it really simple. So I'm only gonna be playing A string, D string, G string for all of these. Here's the first one, C in the bass, 1, 3, 5. C, E, G. E in the bass, right? C, D, E, just walk into the scale until I find it. E, G, C, or 1, 5, or excuse me, 3, 5, 1. I'll play those two. Right? Sounds like the chord is shifted or changed. It hasn't. It's the same thing. And then let's find the next one. C, D, E, F, G. There's our 5th, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's our 5th. So what are the other notes we need? C, the root, and E, the 3rd, which are right here. Almost feels like a little E chord I'm playing up top. That's a C chord with G, the 5th in the bass. Kind of comes from this larger bar chord shape, right? There it is right there. We're just only playing these 3 strings. So listen to all 3 of these chords when I play them back to back. C, E in the bass, G in the bass, back. Feels like the chords are sort of changing right there, but they're not. It's still C chord the whole time. And again, it's because that bass note is changing. This idea of chord inversions is so unbelievably popular, but you might not realize that they're happening because they are subtle, right? We're not actually changing chords. We're just giving you the illusion that we're changing chords. And you can get real wild with this stuff, especially when you start adding in little melodies or extra notes, or if you start doing inversions of multiple chords back to back. So for example, I'm going to play right here just C, F, and G. 3 chords, right? Really simple. I'll just play them normal. C, F, G. Right? About as simple as it can possibly get. But watch what happens when I start playing inversions of all 3 of those chords in a row in kind of whatever order I feel like. And it will sound like there's so much going on even though it's just 3 chords. Check this out. F, G, C. Right? That was just C, F, G. I'll play it one more time. F, G, C, F, G, C, F, G, C. F, G, C up top. C, G, F, G, F, C, F, G, C. And so many cool little melodies are kind of like naturally happening when I do that. I'm not even really thinking much about it. Just how I connect these shapes give you all these really, really cool sounds. So you can also use these sort of in like a lead context as well. This is more of like a chord context. I got a lot of bass notes happening. But even if I try to play kind of smaller chord voicings up top with the same idea, you get so much material just by cycling through different inversions of a very small amount of chords. So for example, I'm going to play, instead of C, F, G, I'll play C, D minor. That's 2 chords, that's it. That's like a 1 chord of C, 2 chord of C. That's all I'm playing, C, D minor, but I'm going to use small little chord shapes instead of these larger, thicker shapes. Watch this. C, D minor, C, D minor, C, D minor. Right? Hear that shift? It's very melodic, very colorful. Sounds like I'm doing a lot. I'm playing 2 chords right there. I'm just hitting all of the inversions as they come. Right? A lot of really cool sounds. Might as well finish that idea. A lot of really cool sounds you can do by just memorizing learning and memorizing all these small inversion shapes, connecting them around the fretboard in a variety of different ways. You get so many cool, like very moving, colorful sounds without really doing much, right? Without really playing like a whole bunch of chords. I'm not really playing chords. That whole passage right there was 2 chords and that is it. I'm just using these inversions in different spots to continuously move in an interesting way. Another way that these inversions are used is to create very kind of like iconic bass lines or chord progressions, again, without using a lot of different chords. So I'm sure you've all have heard something like this, like a movement like this. It's extremely popular, right? So what did I just play right there? Obviously a C chord, obviously an A minor, obviously a G, and obviously an F. But what was that second chord? C? What is this? Right? Most people would look at that and look at what note is in the bass and think it's that chord or something built off of that. Well, what is that? C, obviously C chord. This is a B right here. So a lot of people would look at that and say, oh, it's a B, some sort of B chord, and then A minor, and then G, and then F, right? Okay, that makes sense, but what are the notes that I'm actually playing right there? This is B, G, D. This is not a B chord. This is a G chord with B, G's third, G, A, B in the bass. So the progression that I'm actually playing is C, G, A minor, G again, F. And you might be saying, why would I do that? Why can't I just play a normal G chord right there? Because that would sound like this. C, G, A minor, G, F. Nothing wrong with that, but the bass line is different. Listen to the bass line if I play it like that. Bum, 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 bum. The bass line has this like kind of a different kind of jumpy sound. It starts on C, bum, jumps down to G, bum, then up to A, bum, back down to G, and then F. It has this motion, C, G, A, G, F. It has this kind of jumping motion. Whereas if I use the inversion, this one, I get this smooth, continuously walking down bass line. That's very different, right? It's a different, subtle, but it's very different and creates a different feel than just playing the normal G chord. That's a huge reason why inversions are used, to create bass lines that are interesting or that do a certain thing without having to play a bunch of different chords. And then you might be saying, well, why can't I just play the chord that's naturally built on B right there? Why can't I just do that? Well, what is the chord built on B? If we're in the key of C, B will be the 7, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. C, D, E, F, G, A, B, the 7. What kind of chord is a 7 chord naturally in a key? It's a diminished chord. So if I played that, it would sound like this. Right? Fine. I mean, there's nothing necessarily like wrong with it, but it might be too dissonant for what you're going for. It might be a little too odd for what you're going for, especially if you're trying to write like a normal kind of singer-songwriter type tune. This chord might stand out a little bit too much. And people know that, which is why the vast majority of the time when people do this move, this walking bass line, they don't play the 7 chord right there. They will play the 5 chord, G, but with the 3 in the bass, and that gives this sound. A lot more normal sounding than this, right? Because you get that diminished quality, that 1 in flat 5 might be a little odd sounding for what you're trying to do. So you can see why inversions are so useful once you understand how they're used, once you kind of learn a couple shapes, know where to play them. They can give you so much material, so many options without your music being too chordy, right? You can give this illusion that things are very chordy, but they're really not. It's really the same set of chords that you're using, simple chords, but you're just adjusting where the notes are. So that brings us to what we're going to be talking about in this power-up. So far, all of the chords that I've been playing right there have been 3-note chords, major, minor, what are normally known as triads. But for these power-ups, we're going to focus on larger chords, 4-note chords, in particular, 7th chords. So instead of just 1, 3, 5, like if I do this, instead of just 1, 3, 5 C major, we're going to play 1, 3, 5, 7 of C major to get this sound, just to give you a little bit more kind of like prettier chord voicings, maybe some shapes that you're not necessarily familiar with. Just, I don't know, and I also kind of like them, so that's why we're doing them. But the difference here when we're talking about a 4-note chord, naturally, we now have 4 different ways to invert the chord. If you're only playing a 3-note chord, you have 3 different notes to put in the bass, the 1, the 3, or the 5. But if you have a 4-note chord, adding in that 7, you now have 1, 3, 5, or 7 to put in the chord. So instead of just 3 simple shapes that we have for the normal C chord, we'll have 4 shapes for the C chord. So that would look or sound something like this. We'll talk about these shapes in a later video. That's 1 in the bass, 3 in the bass, 5 in the bass, 7 in the bass, and then 1 in the bass again. Very colorful, right? Really useful shapes, and they might not be that approachable if you're not super comfortable with the concept of inversions. But now that you kind of understand what it is, these shapes are a lot easier to create than you might think. So let's now get started with the first one that we're going to talk about today, the only chord we're going to do today, and then we'll slowly add on some more as the videos go on. But we'll start with a very simple one, minor 7, built off of C sharp. All right, so the C sharp minor 7 that we're going to start with is going to be the very normal one located right here on the 4th fret A string. Kind of looks like that. And we'll talk about this chord here in a second. But remember, this idea, you can do this anywhere as long as your starting chord, your root chord, is this standard minor 7 shape on the A string. You can do it anywhere. We're just doing it on C sharp just because I felt like doing it. And then, of course, you can also take all the ideas that we're talking about today and find your own shapes that I'm not talking about. I mean, there are so many different ways to do this, so don't feel like the shapes that we go over today are the only ones. There are a lot. So I'll leave that up to you to kind of figure out. But we will go through a handful of shapes that you can use kind of however you want, wherever you want, as long as you know how they connect. So speaking of connecting chords, let's figure out how we can do that. So this is our first chord right here. And the first thing we have to know, by the way, I'm only playing 4 strings, not playing either of the E strings, just the middle 4. First thing you have to know, in order to truly do this, you must know the notes that are in this chord and what the numbers of those notes are of this sound. So the notes that I'm playing right now are C sharp, G, B natural, E natural, or excuse me, G sharp, I should say that. C sharp, G sharp, B natural, and then E natural. Now, that of course is important, but what's more important are what these numbers are, because that's going to make this process so much easier. So the numbers of this chord are 1, 5, flat 7, and flat 3. Flat 7 and flat 3 because we're playing minor, especially, or in particular, minor 7, and that is the formula for minor 7. Minor 7s do not have normal 7s. That would sound like this. That is not the chord we're talking about. We're talking about plain minor 7. 1, 5, flat 7, flat 3. This is the process of discovering the rest of these inversions. It's remarkably simple. All you do, remember, what are we doing here? We take the chord, and we, instead of play root in the bass, we simply move up to the next chord tone and play that in the bass. And then all we're going to do is move the rest of the notes up accordingly. So if I move the root right here up to the flat 3, that's the next chord tone, right, of this series of notes in the chord, 1, flat 3, 5, flat 7, right? That's the normal order of the chord. All of the other notes are going to move in the same way. So if 1 is moving to flat 3, the 5 here is going to move to the next chord tone, which is flat 7. So that's going to move right here. Right? What's the next note of the chord? This is flat 7 right there. Where's that going to move? To the next chord tone of the chord, the 1, kind of restarting back at the beginning. And then the top note, the 3, the flat 3, I should say, is moving to its next chord tone, which is what? The 5. So that's all you need to do is you just need to know where that note is going to move and simply find that note on that same string, and then you have the next shape. So I'm going to do that with this chord. I'll do it 1 string at a time. I know my root right here is going to move to flat 3. Where's flat 3? The distance between 1 and flat 3 is always 1, 2, 3 frets, or a minor third, or like a pointer pinky's distance apart, right? That's kind of how I always feel it. So this note, the root note, is now going to move here, right? That's going to be my new bass note. So my eyes are looking at that note, kind of highlighting that note in my head. Okay, where's the next note? I've got 5 right here. Where's that going to move to? The next chord tone of the chord, flat 7. Where's flat 7? Always, just like 1 and flat 3, a minor third apart. So if this is 5, flat 7 will be a pointer pinky's distance apart, or 1, 2, 3 frets. So that's pretty convenient because that means these 2 notes, this power chord, it's just straight up moving up like that to the next set, right? So we've got 1 and 5 moving to flat 3 and flat 7. So far, so good. Flat 7 right here, the note that's underneath my pointer finger on the G string 4th fret, where is that going to move? That's going to move to its next chord tone. What's after flat 7? 1, just restarts. What's the distance between flat 7 and 1? A whole step, as it always is. 1, flat 7, right? So if that's flat 7, that's 1. So far I have these 3 notes moving here, bam, bam, and bam, right? 1 moving to flat 3, 5 moving to flat 7, flat 7 moving to 1. So now I've got this shape. I'm just moving them all up accordingly. And in the meantime, trying to figure out how I'm going to physically play the chord, etc. Then what's the top note? Flat 3. Where's this moving? To the next chord tone, which is what? 5. We're just cycling through the normal notes of the chord. If this is flat 3, where is 5? Flat 3, 4, 5, up 2 whole steps, right? Flat 3, 4, 5. You can think about it like that. So that is where the B string will be. So the A string will be here, right? The D string will be here. G string will be here. And then B string will be there. So if I form this whole chord, here we go. 1, 5, flat 7, flat 3 becomes 3, flat 7, 1, 5. Looks like this. Kind of an awkward chord to play. Whenever I teach this chord, a lot of people have problems with it because it is kind of a stretch. So you either have long fingers or big palms to be able to play this chord, or you can do what I do, which is kind of like tilt your fingers a little bit. My ring finger looks like it's about to break in half because I have it angled very oddly. But to be honest, it's kind of comfortable. Like once you get used to it, it's not bad. It's a great chord too, so it's unfortunate that it's awkward to play because it's a really nice sounding chord. So let's hear them. 1 in the bass, C sharp minor 7. Flat 3 in the bass, C sharp minor 7. Literally the same notes, just in a different order. And again, we have a different bass note. Just like that. Now, side note, you might look at this chord and say, hey, wait a minute, I've played that chord before. Isn't that an E6 chord? Wouldn't that be 1, 5, 6, 3, or E, B, C sharp, G sharp? Isn't that E6? Technically, yes, that is correct. And that's kind of what happens sometimes when you start playing bigger chords, meaning chords that have more notes in them. Chords that have 4 notes, chords that have 5 notes. You start to have like multiple names that these chords could have. So yes, this is actually C sharp minor 7 like we just figured out, but it's also E6, right? Which makes sense because C sharp minor, E major are relative major and minor. We don't have to get into any of that, but that's kind of why this works like that. Very similar in that way. So if that helps you internalize or comprehend this sound a little bit more, by all means, think about it like that if that helps you. So those are the first 2 chords. We got a couple more to go, right? 1 in the bass, flat 3 in the bass. Let's continue. Guess what? The next process, exactly the same. And the distances that we just figured out are also exactly the same. We're going to keep this on this set of strings. Not for long, though. We're going to move strings here in just a second. So same process, right? I've got 3. Again, always have to know what numbers these are. If you know what numbers are happening in the chord, this stuff becomes remarkably easy. So I know I'm playing flat 3, flat 7, 1, 5. And all I need to do, again, move all those notes to the next chord tone of the normal chord series. If that's flat 3, where is it moving? 5. Where is the distance, or what's the distance between flat 3 and 5? I just figured it out earlier, remember? That top note was flat 3 and it moved up to 5. Well, now this note's flat 3 and it's going to move up to 5. Same distance, 2 whole steps. So this is now going to be my starting note for the next chord, so I'll be in this position. So I'm root position right there, 3rd in the bass, and then 5 in the bass will be in this area. So I know it's going to start right there. Let's keep going. This is flat 7. I know that's moving to 1, and 1 is here, right? Just up a whole step. So that means it's going to be 5, 1. That's going to be the beginning of this chord. Let's keep going, right? That's my 1. That's moving to flat 3. What's the distance between 1 and flat 3? Already figured it out down here. 1, flat 3, pointer, pinky's worth. Here's 1, flat 3, pointer, pinky's worth. So that note is happening. So we've got these 2, and then that note. Notice I'm always keeping track of the notes that I've already figured out, so I don't have to redo it every single time. And then I've got one more note to play. This note up top is the 5. Already figured that out. Have to have it in your head. Makes this process so much easier. If that's 5, where's flat 7? Up 3 frets, right? Pointer, pinky's worth. And that gives us this chord, right? Let me get that a little better. So this is 5, 1, flat 3, flat 7. Same chord. We're not changing the chord, right? It's exactly the same notes, just changing how we play it. So here's the first one. 1 in the bass. Next one. 3 in the bass. Next one. 5 in the bass. Now, of course, we can keep going in the same process, and you can do this yourself, move up this way, getting all the shapes. But for variety's sake, I'm actually going to, instead of playing this chord right here, I'm going to actually play it down a set of strings. So instead of being A string, D string, G string, B, I'm actually going to do this starting on the D string. Why? Because I kind of like the variety, and it prevents us from feeling like we have to move like all the way up when we're doing this. Because when we drop down a set of strings, that resets the position a little bit further back. Makes it a little bit easier to play. We don't have to like go all over the place to play all of these. So let's just figure out how we would do that. Really simple, because we know the chord is this, right? 5, 1, flat 3, flat 7. That's what we just figured out. So now we're going to play literally the same exact notes, but just down here. And how do we do that? Remember, what's the bass note? What's the starting note? The 5, right? That's the 1 in the bass, 3 in the bass, 5 in the bass. So let's find this chord right here. Where's 5 right here? We should already know that because we learned that note from this chord, this first chord. 1, 5 is right there. So that means that is where we're going to play this chord right here, right? Now, of course, you can't just take the chord and pop it down right here and expect it to be correct, even though that is a pretty cool chord. Well, that's slightly different. We'll talk about that one. We need to adjust for the tuning issue of the guitar. So instead of up here, it's 5-1 flat 3, but down here it's 5-1 not flat 3, it's flat 3 up a fret. That flat 7 is still sort of in the same position as it was over here. You can see these two notes, and then that pinky. They're the two notes, and then the pinky right there. So I'm literally just popping down the same chord and making my adjustments as I need to. So this is 5-1 flat 3 flat 7. 5-1 flat 3 flat 7. The flat 3 is in a different position because if I did this, that's a 2 right there, which honestly is a pretty cool chord. Kind of a cool one to memorize, and it's easy to play because it feels just like this, but you do have to realize that it is not the same as the chord you're playing up here. This is the shape that you'll play. So now what do we have? Let's run through them all. 1 in the bass, 3 in the bass, flat 3 in the bass, 5 in the bass here or here, which I'm going to play it right here for this exercise. So 1 in the bass, 3 in the bass, 5 in the bass. We got one more, right? Which is that 7 in the bass, and the process is exactly the same. Take all of these notes now on the D string, G string, B string, high E string, and just moving up to the next note of the chord. So again, you have to know the order. That makes it much easier. 5-1, flat 3, flat 7. Right, so let's just start from the bottom. 5 is going to move up to flat 7. Where is that? 3 frets worth, pointer, pinky. So that is going to be the starting note of this next position. I'm here. The next one's going to start around here, okay? What's the next note? 1. This moves up to flat 3. Where is that? Same distance apart, 1 to flat 3. So next chord is going to be this note and then that note stacked, right? The 5 moving there, the 1 moving there. Pretty simple. Next note, flat 3. You should know the distance between the flat 3 and the next note by now. What's the next note? The 5, flat 3, 4, 5, 2 whole steps. So that's right here. Okay, interesting. That means all of the notes we're playing so far are on the same fret, right? The 5 moves to the flat 7. The 1 moves to the flat 3. Flat 3 moves to 5. That puts us all right here, right? Really simple. And then we have this last note, the flat 7. Guess where that one's moving? Up a whole step to the 1, just like it has always done in this whole process. And where is that note? Same fret, right? That makes it really easy. You just play that. That's actually a C sharp minor 7 with the 7 in the bass, right? That's every inversion. And this should look pretty familiar. It should make sense because if you think about the larger C sharp minor that lives right here, that chord, that little barred chord that we're playing actually lives inside of this. So you should be able to see that pretty easily. Let's run through all of them. Make sure you have these shapes memorized. Here's the first one. Standard bar chord shape, pointer, ring, barring that note with the pointer, middle finger, right? This next one that's a little awkward, middle, ring, pointer, pinky, 3 in the bass. Notice the distance, 1 to flat 3 in the bass. 5, from 3 to 5, of course, 3 to 5, but we're now doing 3 to 5 right there, or flat 3 to 5, I should say. Shape looked like this. Kind of looks like a normal A minor, but with the pinky, which makes sense because that's a minor 7, so is this. And then, of course, from here, we just simply move up to right there. If you want to connect these two, I usually think about the top note right there. That pinky note just moves up a whole step, and that's where you bar. That kind of makes it easy. Now, just to wrap things up, we're actually going to start all the way back at the beginning with 1 in the bass, but past this. So that means we'll play a chord here, 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 and then finally finish it back to root position. So let's just do one more, figure it out. It actually will be a little bit easier because we already know what the chord's going to look like. It's going to be this exact chord right here, 1, 5, flat 7, flat 3, but now starting on this C sharp, just up the octave. How did I find that so easily? Because I know this chord was flat 7 in the bass, and where's 1? Up a whole step like always. So right here, if I want to play 1, 5, flat 7, flat 3, the literal order of that first chord, of course I can't just take the chord and pop it down right here because the tuning of the guitar will prevent me from doing that unless you're playing in a different tuning, like straight, fourths all the way down, which allows you to play the same shape. But if I did that, cool chord again, but not correct, right? So let's get the exact order. Remember, 1, 5, flat 7, flat 3. Up here would be 1, 5, flat 7, flat 3. So instead of this note here being there, that's natural 6. That's why the chord sounds pretty cool. Pop it up a fret. Now we have flat 7. Looks like this. A little bit tricky because it's kind of crammed up there, but that is the D string shape of a minor 7 chord with the root in the bass. 1, 5, flat 7, flat 3, just like that. right? So let me play all of those chords in a row, and then we're going to talk about how we're going to physically play this during this power up. So here's the first one, root in the bass. Next one, third in the bass. Next one, fifth in the bass. Next one, seventh in the bass. And then finally, root in the bass, just up the octave. Okay, and I'm gonna do this one more time and kind of zoom in on my hands so you can see what I'm doing. First one. Next one, up 3 frets. That's where we're playing it. Next one, if you want to think about this, down a string, back 1 fret. That's where your bass note is going to be, the 5 in this case. And then from here, you can think about that top note moving up a whole step. That's where you bar, right? That's 7 in the bass. And then finally, low note, flat 7, up a whole step to the root of the next one. And backwards. Now for practice, if you want to practice these shapes, get them down. When I was younger, I would just run them with a metronome, almost like you're playing scales, just back and forth between whichever chords were giving you a problem. So maybe just this one. Next one. Kind of sounds cool with the delay, to be honest. Right? And then, of course, you can do whatever you want, picking patterns. And that's sort of what we're going to do here in this power up. But you can practice this stuff however you want. You want to practice it kind of like a lead. You can do that too, arpeggiate them. That's always pretty valuable. A lot of really cool stuff you can do with these. So feel free to experiment with these. But once you have these shapes down, come back to this part of the video and we'll go over how we're going to physically play the exact pattern of part 1. So before we start, don't feel like you have to play exactly what I'm doing right here. You can kind of play whatever you want over this track. You can play just the static chords as they are, just to memorize them, or you can play whatever pattern you want. You kind of mess around. But if you are curious as to what I'm doing, I'm going to be doing 2 things, and they're going to be based on adding a little melody to the chords, which is a really important thing I think is pretty valuable. Whatever you're doing, whatever chord shape you come up with or, position that you're playing in, always have things to do. Don't just play the chord and say, oh, look, I've got a chord, success. No, look at that and say, what are other things that I can do within this area? And again, a lot of that is much easier if you're able to look at the chord and tell yourself what all the numbers are, right? 1, 5, flat 7, flat 3. Because if you know that, then you can say, well, if this is flat 3, I can easily lift my finger and play 2 right there. That's nice. Or I can put my pinky down right here and play, 4 or add in notes. And it's a lot less guesswork because, for example, if I play this chord, in no way do I want to put my pinky right here, right? That's flat 2. Now, of course, there are some minor chords that have flat 2 and it works, but for this context, I know that note is not going to be one I want to play, and I can confirm that because I know what note this is in this chord because I understand the numbers that live in this position. So backing it up with the information of what you're actually doing is pretty valuable if you want to be comfortable and have control over what you're doing at all times. So let's just go over exactly what I'm doing. First thing, I'm going to play just the chords and add in this little melody. So the first chord, fortunately, is nothing. It's just the exact same thing, that chord. The next one is going to be a little bit different and also a little awkward to play, so good luck with this. I struggle with it a little bit. I'm playing the same chord that we talked about, middle, ring, pointer, pinky, but I'm actually flattening or barring the pinky like that. Kind of looks like my finger just broke in half, but that is what we're doing here. I'm playing this, then grabbing the high E string, picking that note that my pinky is playing. So you're supposed to hear this melody. So bum, bum, bum. That's what you want to hear during this part, because then that note up top will eventually move here to the next chord. So here's the first one. Melody right here with that barred pinky. Next chord, normal. So you hear the melody that's being created. Bum, 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 bum. I missed it that time. Let's try it again. Bum, 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 bum. That's what we're playing right there. So all of that is pretty normal except for that middle chord with the 3 in the bass where we got to bar that pinky. Next chord is that standard bar. I'm doing it right here with my pointer finger. That's the next inversion, the final inversion. From here, again, just adding a little note, also with the pinky, but a lot easier. Playing the normal chord, just reaching up here, adding in that note. What is this note? Because I know the numbers of this chord, flat 7, flat 3, 5, 1. I know I can add in that note. Why? Because that's flat 3, a note that is already in the chord. Will sound perfectly fine. Just like that. And then to continue, here's the next chord that we've been playing, that final 1 chord up top, but I'm actually not playing this to play the melody that I want. I'm playing this. That's 1, 5, flat 7, 2. So instead of playing flat 3 on top like the normal chord we just talked about, I'm barring and playing this. Just because it sounds cool, I kind of wanted that melody. Let's play the whole thing. 1. Next one, 3 in the bass with our little melody, our broken pinky. Right? Next chord, 5 in the bass, normal. Next chord, flat 7 in the bass, adding the pinky note right here. Then the next chord playing this shape, 1, 5, flat 7, 2, pointer, middle, ring, pointer with the bar. Pointer, ring, middle. I don't know if I said that right. You understand. There's the chord. Then from here, so here's that little melody. Right? Normal shape. Go back to the inversion you just played. Same idea, except we're playing our little melody instead of on the 12th fret, back 1 fret, the 2 of the chord, right? Sounds pretty cool. Back here to the normal inversion. This one's going to be a little bit tricky. The normal 3 in the bass inversion, but we're actually going to do this. See what I'm doing there? Lifting the pinky, moving, also lifting the middle finger, so leaving that bass note of the chord and grabbing this note right there on the B string. I know it's an awkward chord, but it sounds cool, so it's worth it. There's the shape, and then finally moving back to the 1. So you hear that melody that's created as we descend. Right, so if I sing it, so I personally really like doing that. I think it kind of makes practicing these shapes a little bit more fun or more interesting to do because it just sounds, like there's a melody. It just doesn't just sound like there are just chords happening over and over again. But again, you don't have to do these hits if you don't want to. You can play it however you want. So I'm gonna do that one more time. And then there's one more thing I'm doing, which we'll talk about here in a second. Here are the chords with the little melody. Normal. Next chord, broken pinky on top, grabbing that note. Next chord, normal. Next chord, adding the pinky note, 12th fret, up 3 frets from the root. Next chord is with the 2 on top, so like this, pointer, ring, middle, pointer, bar. Back to the next one, just simple bar, adding the melody right here, pinky, right there, only up a whole step right there, adding in the 2 of the chord. Next inversion, normal, just going backwards, right? Next one, a little bit tricky. We do that, lift the pinky, move the middle finger down here to the B string, grab that note. And then here. One thing that's important that you might have to kind of work on, you don't want to lift this finger too much because if you do, you kind of play the open A string, which is honestly a pretty sweet chord, but it does change the flavor of the chord, just change the chord entirely. So try to do that in a way where you're muting the A string, so when you do lift that middle finger, you're not playing the open A. So I'm actually muting it with the top part of my ring finger right there, or attempting. So right now, dead A string, that's kind of what you want. Again, you can kind of practice this in whatever way makes the most sense to you. And then the last thing I'm doing that figure right there kind of every other time, but on the even times or the odd times that I'm playing this repetition, I'm actually doing a finger picking pattern. Again, you don't have to do this, but it's kind of cool if you want to try it. The pattern is this. The melody stays. Bum, 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 bum. It's exactly the same thing, except the picking pattern that I'm adding is always playing this figure on the low strings. So it's going to sound like this if I play each chord with just those picking notes. Next one, next one, next one, next one. Just like that. So how I'm doing it is I'm playing that little top melody note with my ring finger right here, and then the picking pattern I'm playing pick, pick, middle finger, pick. So I'll do that a couple times. So if you can see my right hand, so pick and ring at the same time, starting the melody, pick, ring, or excuse me, pick, pick, middle, pick, like that. So if I run the whole thing, kind of tricky, but it kind of flows once you get it. Right? That's the part. So it's a little tricky to kind of get it down, but once you're there, it's not too bad. So the one thing that you'll notice, it starts normal, like I just did. Then we're here. Now, once we start adding these extra little melody notes, there's going to be 2 ring finger hits on the downbeat and then on the same hit as the middle finger. So you'll be going ring finger pick, 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 middle and ring at the same time on their respective strings. To keep that melody going, next chord's normal with the little top note melody once. Same thing here. Now top note melody, but when I get to the middle finger, picking those strings at the same time. Pick, pick, middle finger and ring finger to continue the melody and the pattern. like that. Next one, normal. Same thing here. Pick those top 2 strings at the same time with the 2 fingers. Excuse me. Just like that, back to normal. Same thing here, watch this. Right? Pick with the ring finger at the same time. Pick, middle and ring at the same time with our little melody. Back to the pick and do the whole thing. So it's a little tricky to get down. Again, you don't really have to do that. I just like how it sounds. That's what I'm doing. You can practice this if you want. You can use it as a little bit of an ear training exercise if you'd like, or you can practice these shapes, you know, just simply playing the chords, or maybe just the chords and the static melody. Yep, just like that. So also this track and all the tracks we're doing here, it's not about speed, kind of like some of the other power-ups I've done. This is more about just memorizing these chords and being able to play them and have them sound as clean as possible as you run through them in time. So with that in mind, let's get on to these backing tracks. All right, that does it for part 1 of this chord inversion power-up. As usual, if you enjoy this type of instructional material, feel free to check out my Patreon at the link below, and I'll see you all in part 2.